It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I recently received an email from Mike Cohn where he's talking about story writing tips. And the one that he brought up that I thought was really interesting and I want to talk about today is how to handle non functional requirements. And he starts off by saying, here in the US, we're in the midst of tax season. Our annual income taxes must be paid no later than April 18th this year. While thinking about, or gulp, actually paying taxes is not very fun, it does provide a useful example of how to think about non functional requirements. That's actually a really good example. A non functional requirement is a requirement about how the system exists in the world rather than about something users can do with that system. So, non functional requirements are often about performance, capacity, maintainability, localizability, interoperability, usability, portability, and so on. Because so many of these end with ility, they are often called the ilities of a system. For example, a feature or function requirement of a word processor might be that it has a spell checker. The spell checker is something the user can do with a word processor to make sure their spelling's correct. A non functional requirement might be that the spell checker must work in English, French, German, and Spanish. This requirement is about how the spell check feature exists in the world. In this case, it exists in 4 different languages. If the development team speaks English, that version would be one developed first. And the team will have a non functional requirement to make the spell checker also work in French, German, and Spanish. Whether this is thought of as one requirement for 3 different additional languages or 3 different requirements, each for one additional language, will not matter much at this point. The effort to produce these translated versions can be thought of as a tax on the development team's performance. Consider whatever speed the team was going at before. They must now move a little bit slower due to the need to produce those translators. It doesn't matter whether the translations happen in a sprint behind, or whenever. In the grand scheme of things, the team is going slower by the amount of effort it takes to produce the additional translations. That is, they are slower by the amount that they are taxed. The amount of these taxes can become quite significant over time. Support the 3 last releases or the 3 browsers. That's a tax. Work on these 3 latest Windows releases. That's a tax. Perform at this level. That's a tax. Future scalability, that number of users to increase. That's a tax. I hope through this metaphor about the cost of non functional requirements, you can use to think through the value of including each on your project. If you're thinking about and considering that there's taxes on enablers, that there's taxes on other things, this is going to help you be successful with your Agile implementation. Now, what I can tell you is that the truth behind non functional requirements is that they don't go away. They're always there. There are always things that we need to do to enable or to embody a system to help it do a certain task or perform a certain way. We expect certain behaviors and we want certain things to happen when we build a product or service. But we never take the time to think about the things that we have to do in order for that system to function in a very specific way. So I suppose my advice here, while this article for Mike was perfect, spot on, right on point, we need to consider all the different ilities and decide how we as a team are going to address those. This is one of those areas where I think Scaled Agile Framework did a good job of discussing that one of the different types of stories is an enabler. And it discusses the abilities or the ilities, if you will, and allows you to understand the capabilities or the different abilities that you should have in order for a product, service, or system to perform in a certain way. So, I guess the summary here is that we need to consider non functional requirements as user stories, just like we consider regular requirements as user stories. We need to understand that there are different types of stories that include enhancements, updates, bug fixes, enablers. They're all the research, spikes. They're all different things, but each of those are different types of stories that can be placed into a sprint that take up part of the team's time, that take up part of the team's capability. So we need to make sure that we're estimating those, that we're using t shirt sizes or any other metric, and that we're counting those as part of the embodiment of what the team needs to do to keep the lights on. Because if not, a lot of times we don't take those things into consideration, and these things creep up on us. And many times people refer to this as scope creep. So that's going to do it. I hope that you enjoyed this short episode. Thanks, Mike, for another great email. He always sends me the greatest emails. If you have a question regarding this article or regarding any of the topics we discussed, feel free to reach out to us. Learn more at agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. As always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.